I booked a haunted Airbnb for a weekend getaway with friends, expecting a few spooky decorations and maybe a ghost story or two. What we found was far more terrifying than any jump scare. We were scrolling through Airbnb, searching for something different, something beyond the usual cookie-cutter vacation rentals. Then we saw it. A listing for an old Victorian house tucked away in a secluded part of the countryside. The photos were captivating: peeling wallpaper, dusty antique furniture, and a general air of neglect that hinted at a mysterious past. The listing itself was even more intriguing. It boldly claimed to be haunted, mentioning unexplained noises, sudden drops in temperature, and even possible paranormal activity reported by previous guests. We exchanged skeptical glances, but the allure of a genuinely spooky experience was undeniable. The idea of spending a weekend in a house with a history of the supernatural, even if it was just for fun, was too tempting to resist. We booked it impulsively, a thrill of anticipation quickly replacing our initial skepticism. Pulling up to the house gave us the creeps. The wind howled through the trees, and the old house looked spooky against the darkening sky. Peeling paint, dirty windows, and an eerie silence made us uneasy. Inside, it was even worse. Dust motes danced in a single ray of light, showing cobwebs everywhere. The air was stuffy and smelled old. Floorboards creaked as we walked, and doors groaned on their own. The lights flickered, casting weird shadows. Then, things got stranger. A porcelain doll fell off a shelf and landed face down. We tried to ignore it, but then a book slid off a table, and an old clock started swinging wildly for no reason. It felt colder, and we felt like something was watching us. As night fell, things got worse. We heard whispers coming from the walls, then they got louder. It felt freezing cold, and a draft made us shiver. Suddenly we saw it, a shadowy figure moving down the hall. We were terrified. The noises got louder, scratching, clanging, and a deep growling sound. "I think we should leave," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Fear was taking over. We huddled together, trying to convince ourselves it was just the old house, but we knew something was really wrong. Ignoring Sarah's protests, we decided to investigate. We crept through the house, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every creak of the floorboards made us jump. In the attic, hidden behind a loose floorboard, we found a dusty old box. Inside, we found a faded newspaper clipping. It told the story of the previous owner, an old man who lived alone. Neighbors had heard strange noises and seen shadowy figures in his windows. The article hinted at foul play, a possible murder. A wave of fear washed over us. This wasn't just a haunted house. This was a place steeped in tragedy. The whispers, the cold, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't our imagination. It was the house itself, clinging to the memory of a terrible past. Panic seized us. We weren't dealing with playful ghosts or harmless hauntings. This was something real, something dangerous. We scrambled to gather our belongings, our hands trembling as we fumbled with zippers and latches. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, kept glancing over her shoulder, convinced she was being watched. The front door seemed to resist our efforts, as if an unseen force was keeping it shut. We wrestled with the lock, our fear fueling a surge of adrenaline. Finally, with a desperate heave, the door swung open, and we stumbled out into the chilling night air. We didn't look back, running blindly down the driveway, the eerie glow of the house receding in the distance. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the main road, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We huddled together, shivering not just from the cold, but from the lingering terror of what we had experienced. The haunted Airbnb had turned out to be far more terrifying than any of us could have ever imagined. We never returned to the house, nor did we ever speak of that night again for a long time. The experience left a deep scar on us all. Sarah developed an intense fear of the dark and couldn't sleep alone for weeks. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being watched. Even now, years later, the memory of that night still haunts us. Was it truly the ghost of the old man seeking vengeance from beyond the grave, or was it something else entirely? Something more sinister and inexplicable? We may never know for sure. But one thing is certain: the haunted Airbnb was far more terrifying than any of us could have ever imagined.